You're watching TelecomTV's exclusive coverage of the SDN and OpenFlow event from Singapore. And I'm joined now by Dan Pitt, who is Executive Director of the Open Networking Foundation, the organisation behind OpenFlow. Dan, what stage are we with the ongoing development of SDN and OpenFlow?
It's interesting because we have the forwarding plane, the control plane, and the application plane. There's also the management plane, which is starting to come into conversation. And there is a lot of foment, a lot of creativity, a little bit of chaos, which is a good sign because it means that people are applying all kinds of new ideas. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of the interfaces here and what's going in there. But the good news is that despite lack of complete agreement on the interfaces between these planes, there is independent work going on in all the planes, which shows that the conceptual separation of the planes has been useful. You don't have the dependence of every plane on another as you did in the vertically integrated solutions, so that the forwarding plane people are making great progress in chipsets to support packet processing at very high speed and low cost. And this year, a big thrust on OpenFlow hardware support.
When you say hardware development, where is that? Is it in the network device layer?
Yes, it is. It's in the forwarding plane. And actually, that's a kind of a trick question because there has been a requirement to have a reflection of the specifics of the forwarding plane, the pipeline, even in a chipset, reflected in the control plane and in the application, which is nuts. So we are actually changing that. So we are seeing implementations in hardware of the latest multi-table versions of OpenFlow finally in ways that give us portability of hardware and interoperability of hardware. This has eluded us for a few years. And some work that we are doing now in some of the open source control planes is to enable the chip vendors to put their own little driver in the control plane so the rest of the control functions and the applications are independent of what that pipeline looks like. So tremendous creativity in the pipeline solutions and the switches for top of rack, spine, enterprise, campus, customer premises running at their own speed.
There are alternatives emerging to OpenFlow in the southbound link. So what support has OpenFlow received?
There are, in my view, a few too many alternatives on the southbound side to OpenFlow, some by necessity because it hasn't really been there. It's much easier to do a software implementation of something or leverage something that already exists, but it doesn't really fulfill the great benefit of the match action abstraction of the forwarding plane. So, for example, a popular alternative is netconf and yang. Well, that's for network configuration. We in ONF actually use that in our OpenFlow configuration protocol, and that's where it makes sense. It does not make sense to actually populate a table of forwarding instructions based on matches and actions, which OpenFlow does. There are other alternatives that really know better and are, I think, put out there kind of to avoid the industry standard leveling of the playing field in the forwarding plane. Also, our philosophy in ONF is to keep the forwarding plane as simple as possible as just a high-performance packet processor or optical switch, and let all the control intelligence reside in the servers, up in the data center, in the control plane, the management plane, or the application plane. That's why we don't want to see policy interpreted down in the forwarding plane. That complicates it and makes it more expensive. We see policy interpretation up in the control plane with the instructions that are deduced from that being sent down to the forwarding plane.
Is it a case that vendors can sometimes get too caught up with their own interests, their own manoeuvring, and that comes at the expense of creating this solid, exciting, open new network architecture?
Well, there is some of that, and there always has been and will be some of that, but I think it's overshadowed by the degree of cooperation among many vendors on the common building blocks, typically the open source controllers. We have Open Daylight, we have RIO, we have the Open Network Operating System, ONOS. And these are tremendously efficient vehicles for consolidating industry resources efficiently to develop these elements of the network architecture that do not require vendor differentiation. So tremendous contribution by many companies in these two most popular ones. This frees up their resources to offer value-added services and differentiation that more directly translate into customer benefit.
This year, the mobile industry has started talking in earnest about the development of 5G, and they're all in agreement that SDN and NFV will play an essential part in this new network architecture. What's the ONF doing to proactively encourage this?
I gave a talk at a really great session at the Mobile World Congress in February. And as a result of that, we are now working closely with NGMN to make sure that the 5G architecture that they are developing takes best advantage of what SDN can bring. The same is true with NFV, both in ETSI NFV and in OP NFV. We're collaborating with both to make sure, again, that they take full advantage of what NFV can achieve with an underpinning of SDN. We think that the SDN provides an important foundation for the virtualization of network functions and essentially for all of NGMN, so that you can actually develop software versions of these functions that will, I think, constitute more and more of a deconstructed OSS and an opportunity to offer new revenue-producing services by the operators over a common physical infrastructure.
So your message to telcos is, don't wait, plan for and invest in SDN now.
I've been suggesting to them that for several years now that they invest now, even at a small scale. Get some in-house experience. Do a lab trial, if nothing else. And number one, build up your software skill set in your company. And number two, push your vendors for what you want. I had a meeting last week with a major world-famous telecom service provider who was adamant to push the vendors to offer what they're calling pure OpenFlow, native OpenFlow equipment, not OpenFlow with a fallback to layer 2, 3. I want the new stuff. This is going to transform my business. I want to buy best-of-breed solutions. I don't want them complicated by vertical integration that is vendor unique.
Dan Pitt, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, guy.